In the middle of the most important meeting of the year, the millionaire CEO decided to humiliate the cleaning lady in front of the new foreign investors. He shouted, "Someone translate for her that she is fired." He expected laughter, but what happened next was his worst nightmare. The principal investor stood up, silently walked up to the woman, and to everyone's shock, hugged her. The CEO froze. Then the investor looked at him with a deadly gaze and said the words that made the millionaire turn pale and break out in a cold sweat, sealing his fate. The conference room atop the Sterling Group skyscraper was a glass cage suspended high above downtown Chicago. The afternoon sun beat against the panoramic windows, reflecting the shimmer of Lake Michigan and transforming distant buildings into gilded silhouettes. But for Dr. Alan Vance, the company's CEO, the breathtaking view was a blur of anxiety. He felt the weight of every floor beneath him, each representing a layer of his life, his supposed success, that now threatened to collapse like a house of cards. The cold sweat on his forehead wasn't due to the heat, but the ice spreading through his veins. Seated across from him, around the imposing mahogany table, were the men who represented his one last hope, a Swiss investment consortium. They were his life raft in an ocean of debt. Their leader, the reclusive billionaire Mr. Steiner, remained impassive, an enigma clad in a perfectly tailored grey suit. His eyes, a pale, cutting blue, showed no emotion as Vance, his voice slightly trembling, went through his presentation slides. Every pie chart seemed smaller. Every profit projection sounded more like a desperate plea than a business forecast. He spoke of assets and liabilities, of profitability potential, and the urgent need for a capital injection to restructure operations. It was the pitch of his life, and he knew he was failing. The fortune he had taken 30 years to build, a portfolio spanning real estate, stocks, and financial applications, was dissolving before his eyes. The Sterling Group, the empire he inherited from his father and swore to multiply, was on the brink of bankruptcy. Steiner didn't utter a word. He simply listened to the simultaneous translation through his earpiece, his face a mask of neutrality. For Vance, that silence was torture. It was worse than any objection or difficult question. It was the sound of his world ending. He clung to the hope that Steiner's reputation as an audacious investor who saw opportunities where others saw ruins was true. Perhaps he saw past the red ink to the intrinsic value, the dormant potential. Vance cleared his throat, preparing for the grand finale, the part where he would beg with what little dignity he had left. It was then that the conference room door opened with a soft, almost inaudible click. The figure who entered was as familiar in the corporate environment as computers and leather chairs, and, to Vance, equally invisible most of the time. It was Elena Santos, the cleaning woman, carrying a tray with a pitcher of iced water and crystal glasses. She walked slowly, her shoulders stooped by years of service, her face etched with a lifetime of silent work. Her eyes, however, still held a gentle spark. She approached the table, nervousness evident in her hands, conscious of the meeting's importance. Reaching out to place the pitcher in the center of the table, her foot caught slightly on the base of one of the chairs. It was a minimal stumble, a second of imbalance, but it was enough. The pitcher swayed, and a splash of water spilled, forming a small puddle on the polished surface of the table. Dangerously close to Vance's meticulously arranged papers, the room froze. The sound of the water seemed to echo like thunder in the oppressive silence. Vance's eyes, previously fixed on the investors, now locked onto the puddle and then the aging woman who caused it. An irrational fury, fueled by panic and humiliation, began to rise in his throat, burning like acid. All his failure, all his powerlessness needed a target, and she was right there. Time seemed to stretch and contract in that instant. For Vance, the small puddle of water on the mahogany table became a dark ocean, reflecting the abyss of his own failure. Every drop was a mockery, a reminder of his fragility at the moment he most needed to appear unshakable. The pounding of his heart hammered in his ears, drowning out the voice of reason. He didn't see an elderly woman who had made a small mistake. He saw the personification of chaos, the final breaking of an order he was desperately fighting to maintain. His fortune, his empire, his father's legacy, everything was on the line, and this woman, with her insignificant trip, had stained the perfect scene he tried to paint. The pressure accumulated over months of sleepless nights, tense calls with creditors, and disastrous meetings found a pressure valve. The fury exploded from within him, hot and uncontrolled. "You incompetent fool! Useless!" he roared, his voice hoarse with a rage far greater than the incident warranted. He slammed his palm hard on the table, and the sharp, violent sound made everyone jump. The crystal glasses rattled, and Elena Santos flinched as if the blow had struck her. Her shoulders hunched even further, and her head dropped, the graying hair partially hiding a face contorted in a mask of fear and humiliation. Tears began to well up, silent and hot, tracing paths down the wrinkles of her skin. She made no sound. Her pain was a mute, overwhelming presence in the room. The Swiss investors exchanged quick, almost imperceptible glances. Mr. Steiner's mask of neutrality didn't shift, but his blue eyes seemed to darken, gaining a chilling depth. The two translators, young and accustomed to high-pressure environments, paled. They stared at any point in the room except Vance or the weeping woman. It was a breach of protocol so violent, a cruelty so naked, that the embarrassment was almost palpable, a bitter taste in the air conditioning. Vance, however, was blind to it all. In his mind, distorted by panic, he believed he was projecting strength, showing the Swiss he was a tough-minded leader who tolerated no failure. He wanted them to see a man in control, not a corporate beggar. With a cruel, forced smile, he turned to the official translator nearest him. "Please translate for Mr. Steiner what I'm about to say," he ordered, his tone laden with an authority he no longer possessed. He paused dramatically, savoring the power of crushing someone weaker. "Tell this woman that, translate that she is fired, effective immediately." The order hung in the air, venomous and irrevocable. The room grew quieter, if that was possible. The translators looked at each other, panic etched on their faces. How could they translate such brutality? How could they be the vehicle for that humiliation? They remained motionless, speechless, paralyzed by basic decency. Elena Santos, hearing the word "fired," let out a small sob, the only sound that broke the tense silence. Her body trembled visibly, a fragile leaf in a storm. Vance looked on, waiting, his fury giving way to arrogant impatience. It was in that moment of deafening silence that Mr. Steiner moved. Slowly, without haste, he pushed his leather chair back. The scraping sound on the polished floor seemed like a scratch on the soul of everyone present. With a calm that violently contrasted with Vance's explosion, he stood up. All eyes in the room turned to him, holding their breath. His tall, imposing figure cast a shadow over the table, and his face, for the first time, revealed something beyond neutrality, a cold, unwavering resolve. Mr. Steiner rose with a fluidity that belied his size. Every movement was deliberate, imbued with a silent authority that filled the room and suffocated the remaining oxygen. He didn't look at Vance. His eyes, a blue that now seemed to hold the fury of a frozen sea, were fixed on Elena Santos. He circled the long mahogany table, his Italian leather shoes barely making a sound on the marble floor. The world seemed to have held its breath. Vance, still standing, felt himself shrink, as if the billionaire's towering presence was absorbing all the power and status he believed he possessed. The investor, the man whose signature could save or destroy his legacy, ignored him completely, as if he were an insignificant piece of furniture in the room. The contempt was so absolute, it hurt more than any insult. Steiner stopped in front of the trembling cleaning woman. She was so curled up that she looked like a frightened child. Tears still streamed down her face, but she didn't dare lift her head. Gently, with a care that seemed out of place in that environment of cutthroat business, Steiner placed his hand on her shoulder. She flinched at the touch, perhaps expecting another blow, another harsh word. Instead, the hand held her with firmness and kindness, and then, to the absolute shock of everyone, especially Vance, the reclusive and powerful Mr. Steiner pulled her into an embrace. He wrapped his arms around her, ignoring the water that had soaked the front of her uniform, and held her with protective strength. He kissed the top of her graying hair, a gesture of profound affection and respect. He leaned down and whispered something in her ear, in soft, guttural German. The words were incomprehensible to the Americans in the room, but their effect was immediate. A new sob escaped Elena Santos, but this one was different. It carried the sound of liberation, the relief that breaks a dam of long-held sorrow. She clung to the billionaire's expensive suit and wept openly, but now her tears seemed to wash away the humiliation. After a long moment, Steiner gently released her, but kept a protective hand on her shoulder, holding her close like a shield. Only then did he turn to Vance. The ice in his eyes had turned to steel. The air in the room grew thin, heavy with unbearable tension. The expression on Steiner's face was not one of rage, but of a contempt so deep, so ancient, that it seemed to have been carved in stone. And when he spoke, his voice was low, controlled, but every syllable was a sliver of ice. And he did not speak in German for the translator. He spoke in perfect, unaccented English, his tone making his words sharper. "Dr. Vance, I didn't need translation," he said. The sentence landed like a judgment. Vance felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him pale and clammy. The floor seemed to undulate beneath his feet. He understood everything. The investor had not only witnessed his outburst, but had understood it in its entirety, in his native language. The performance of firm resolve had not been a display of strength, but a spectacle of grotesque cruelty for an audience that needed no subtitles. The sweat that had previously beaded on his forehead now trickled down his back. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to invent a justification, but no sound came out. His mind, previously sharp for business and negotiations, was blank, paralyzed by dread. Steiner watched him struggle without an ounce of pity in his gaze. His hand still on Eleanor's shoulder, he continued, his icy voice echoing in the deadly silence of the room. "I spent the last few weeks analyzing your business, your assets, your cash flow, your profitability, but I forgot to analyze the most crucial asset of any company." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Your character." Steiner's words, "your character," hung in the air like a final condemnation. Vance felt as if a steel door had closed behind him, locking him into a vacuum of humiliation. The skyscraper, which had always been the symbol of his power and fortune, suddenly seemed like a glass prison, and he, the exposed inmate in its highest cell. He tried to find the words, an excuse, anything that could mitigate the disaster. Perhaps he could plead stress, business pressure, but looking at Steiner's face, he knew it would be useless. That man didn't see a stressed CEO, he saw a petty tyrant, and that judgment was irrevocable. Steiner, with his hand still firmly supported on Elena Santos's shoulder, took a step forward, closing the distance between him and Vance. His presence was overwhelming, a mountain of dignity and silent power that crushed the empty arrogance of the American CEO. The billionaire's gaze swept the room, passing over the cowering translators and the other members of his consortium before returning to fix on Vance with an intensity that made him want to retreat. "When my family fled the war, we arrived in this country with nothing," Steiner began, his voice resounding with the weight of a painful memory. The European accent, previously only a curiosity, was now the sound of a history about to collide with the present in a devastating way. We had no money, no possessions, not a roof we could call our own. We were just refugees, invisible to most people. He paused, and his eyes softened for an instant as he looked at the woman beside him. My father passed away shortly after we arrived. Exhausted by the journey and the sadness, my mother became ill, heartbroken, and her body too weak to fight. It was just the two of us, a sick mother and a frightened boy, in a modest house on the outskirts of this very city. The raw and unexpected narrative silenced every thought in Vance's mind. The luxurious conference room, with its panoramic view of Chicago, disappeared, replaced by the image of a poor, helpless child on a dusty street. It was this woman, Elena, Steiner continued, his voice choked with contained emotion, who lived on our street. She didn't have much. She barely managed to support her own children, but she saw us. She saw our hunger, our despair, and she gave us food from the little she had. She shared her bread, her rice, her soup. She kept us alive. Elena Santos, who until then had been crying from relief and gratitude, now looked at the billionaire's face with an expression of astonishment and slow recognition. The features of the mature man in front of her began to overlay those of the thin, frightened-eyed boy she had taken in so many years ago. A memory, a little Hans, the boy who always had his head buried in books. Her breath caught in her throat. Steiner squeezed her shoulder with more affection. And when it was time for me to go to school, I had no shoes. My feet were bruised and bare. It was she who gave me my very first pair of shoes. He looked down at his own feet, clad in expensive, polished leather, as if he could still feel the roughness of that first pair, a gift that meant the world. She gave me the chance to walk toward a future. The revelation fell upon the room like a silent bomb. Vance staggered backward, his hand seeking support on the table. The cleaning woman, the woman he had just humiliated and fired, was the benefactor of the man who held his company's fate in his hands. It was a twist so cruel, so perfectly ironic, that it seemed straight out of fiction. But Steiner's gaze, etched with the truth of a lifetime of gratitude, left no room for doubt. The small conference room became the stage for a drama that transcended business, profits, and dividends. It was about humanity, about debts that no money could ever repay. The contempt in Steiner's eyes was a physical force, pushing Vance toward a reality he had never imagined. The conference room floor, once the pinnacle of his power, now seemed like a trap door about to open. He looked at the billionaire, then at the cleaning woman he had humiliated, and the connection between them was a cruel paradox his mind refused to process. The story Steiner told was not just an anecdote from the past. It was the foundation upon which this entire moment was being built. The woman he considered less than nothing was, in fact, the cornerstone of the fortune and character of the man he desperately needed to survive. The irony was so overwhelming, it left him breathless. Vance felt panic surge like a tide, drowning his arrogance. He needed to fix this. He needed to apologize, to grovel, to do whatever it took to reverse the disaster. Mr. Steiner, I had no idea, he stammered, his voice a pathetic thread. It was a misunderstanding. The pressure, the stress. Elena, please forgive me. His words sounded hollow even to his own ears. They were the flimsy excuses of a cornered man, not the sincere remorse of a contrite heart. Steiner raised a hand, silencing him. The gesture was calm, but carried the finality of a closing vault door. "There is nothing to understand, Dr. Vance," he said, his voice still icy. "I came here to save a company, but I have just discovered it is led by a man utterly lacking in dignity." He turned to his associates, who watched the scene in shocked silence. "The deal is off." The phrase, spoken with brutal simplicity, was the final hammer blow in the coffin of the Sterling Group. There was no negotiation, no room for appeal. It was a sentence. Vance's world collapsed in silence. A lifetime's work, his father's inheritance, the wealth he was so proud of multiplying through aggressive investments and business expansion, all turned to dust in less than 5 minutes. He looked at the spreadsheets on the table, the numbers that once represented his power and wealth, and now they were just meaningless scribbles. Steiner then turned to the woman who was still under the protection of his arm. His tone changed completely, the coldness disappearing, giving way to a warmth and tenderness that transformed her before everyone's eyes. "And Elena," he said, smiling at her for the first time. The smile illuminated his severe face, revealing the boy she had once known. "Please call your attorney." Elena looked at him, confusion clouding the relief in her eyes. An attorney? Why? She had never needed an attorney in her entire life. Steiner seemed to understand her confusion and explained with devastating calm, his gaze passing over her to fix on Vance. "We are going to buy this building," he declared, his voice resonating with absolute power, "and you will be the new superintendent." The final declaration was so unexpected, so audacious, that for a moment no one reacted. Vance gaped, his mind unable to grasp the magnitude of the reversal. Fire the cleaning woman and, in return, lose her to her as the new manager of his own building. It was a nightmare. Ignoring the chaos he had created, Steiner took out his cell phone. He walked away toward the panoramic window, turning his back on the shattered CEO. He dialed a number and began speaking in German, his voice rapid, precise, and full of authority. Vance didn't understand the words, but he understood perfectly what was happening. This wasn't a retreat. It was the beginning of an invasion. The news of the cancelled deal and the dramatic scene in the conference room leaked before the elevator doors even closed. It started as a whisper among the aides, spread through the executive floor like a cold wind, and descended through the floors like an avalanche, dragging down the morale and security of hundreds of employees. Within minutes, the atmosphere at the Sterling Group changed from hopeful tension to veiled panic. No one knew the details, only the essentials. The Swiss were gone, the deal failed, and Dr. Vance was at the center of a monumental disaster. As chaos began to bubble, Vance locked himself in his office. He couldn't face anyone. The walk from the conference room corridor to his door seemed to last an eternity. Every glance from an employee was like a knife in his back. He sat in his leather chair, the same one that had been his throne for years, and felt like an imposter. He looked out the window at the city stretching below, no longer as a king observing his domain, but as a man on a ledge about to fall. His mind raced in vicious circles of rage and self-pity. How could this happen? He blamed Elena for her clumsiness, blamed Steiner for his disproportionate revenge, blamed the world for a cosmic conspiracy against him. The idea that the fault was entirely his own was a thought so painful that he pushed it away whenever it tried to emerge. Elsewhere in the city, Elena Santos was being escorted out of the building, not as a fired employee, but as an honored guest. 2 of Steiner's personal security guards accompanied her, clearing a path through the busy lobby with a firm politeness that drew curious stares. She was stunned, her heart beating erratically. A shiny black luxury car awaited her at the curb. The driver opened the door for her. Hesitantly, she peered into the cream leather interior, a world so distant from her reality of buses and walking. One of Steiner's associates approached her with a gentle smile. "Ms. Santos, Mr. Steiner asked us to take you home safely. He will be in touch shortly." She merely nodded, unable to form a sentence. The image of her, the humble cleaning woman, getting into that opulent car while the empire of her tormentor crumbled, was a powerful contrast that did not go unnoticed by those watching from the windows. Meanwhile, in a presidential suite at the city's most luxurious hotel, Steiner had already transformed the space into a command center. His analysts and lawyers, previously focused on an investment agreement, were now working on a hostile acquisition strategy. Charts and projections filled laptop screens. Words like assets, liabilities, and cash flow were spoken in urgent tones. Steiner's fortune, built with surgical precision in the stock market and international deals, would now be fully mobilized. He wasn't just cancelling a deal, he was initiating a corporate war, and his capital was his infinite ammunition. Back in the gloomy office, Vance's door opened. It was his daughter, Sophia, a young marketing manager who had inherited her father's intelligence, but not his coldness. She looked worried. "Dad, what happened? People are saying that—" Vance cut her off, his voice harsh. "It's none of your business. Get back to work." "No, Dad, it is my business. This company is Grandpa's legacy." The mention of his father hit Vance hard. Sophia approached his desk, her gaze sweeping over the disorder. Her finger stopped on a picture frame turned face down. She picked it up and flipped it over. It was an old photo, a younger, smiling Vance next to his father, a gentle-looking man with kind eyes. The image of the founder, the man who built the Sterling Group based on integrity, seemed to judge the son from inside the silver frame. Sophia looked from the photo to her father's bitter face, and a question formed in her mind, heavy and inevitable. How did he turn into this? In the days that followed, Chicago became the chessboard for a silent and ruthless corporate chess match. On one side, Vance, increasingly isolated, desperately tried to mobilize his resources, contacting other shareholders and seeking bank support to fend off the acquisition. He quickly discovered that the name Steiner opened doors that were now closed to him. Panic began to infiltrate his decisions, leading him to consider selling off part of his personal wealth, including a stock portfolio that represented years of accumulated profits. On the other side, Steiner acted with calculated calm. His first move, however, was not financial, but deeply personal. He asked one of his aides to locate Elena Santos and invite her to a meeting. He specified it shouldn't be in an office or an expensive restaurant, but in a simple place, a local coffee shop in her neighborhood. Elena accepted, her heart torn between fear of the unknown and a growing curiosity about the boy Hans. She arrived at the small cafe, a place smelling of fresh bread and brewed coffee, and found him sitting at a corner table, dressed casually, without the intimidating suit. For a moment, he was just a man, not the billionaire who had shaken her world. He rose to greet her with a warm smile. "Elena, thank you for coming." They talked for over an hour. He made her speak about her life, her children, her grandchildren. He listened with a genuine attention that made her feel seen and valued in a way she hadn't in years. Then he began to share his own memories. He spoke of the hunger, the cold, and the fear of his childhood, and how the plate of warm food she brought to his mother was the highlight of their days. "You didn't just give us food, Elena," he said, his voice husky. "You gave us hope. That gesture of kindness was the first and most important investment ever made in me. It taught me that dignity isn't about money. The return on that act was infinite." It was then that the conversation took an unexpected turn, a turning point that would change everything. Elena, feeling more at ease, began to share her own memories of that time. "I remember your mother, such a strong woman. And I remember another good man from that time, my first boss in the big city." Steiner leaned in, interested. "Who was he?" "It was the elder Mr. Vance," she said, and the name hung in the air between them. "The father of Dr. Vance. He gave me my first real job, cleaning the small office he had before all this." Steiner tensed. "But you worked for his father?" "Yes," Elena continued, lost in her recollections. "He was the opposite of his son, a fair man who knew everyone's name. He always said the greatest asset of his company was its people. He carried a small black-covered journal everywhere. He wrote everything in it, not just business numbers, but thoughts, ideas, principles. He called it the soul of the company. A new light shone in Steiner's eyes. The battle was no longer just personal revenge against Vance. It became something greater, the chance to restore a lost legacy, the soul the son had sold in exchange for profit. "Elena," he said, his voice urgent, "do you have any idea where that journal might be?" Elena thought for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she searched the depths of her memory. He kept the old things in a basement room in the building, a dusty place no one else visited. If it still exists, it must be there. The revelation about the elder Mr. Vance's journal sparked a new urgency in Steiner's team. The acquisition of the building and the company was no longer just a matter of numbers and strategy. Now it had a soul, a mission. Steiner immediately tasked Klaus, his lead aide, a methodical and efficient young German, with leading a small team to discreetly gain access to the Sterling Group's basement archives. The legal justification would be part of the due diligence process, the analysis of company assets, a perfect pretext for scouring forgotten records. News of this maneuver reached Vance's ears, making him even more paranoid. What could they want in the basement? Old documents, buried secrets. He instructed his lawyers to impede access, to create bureaucratic barriers, but Steiner's legal offense was overwhelming, and every barrier was knocked down in a matter of hours. The search began on a Wednesday morning. The basement was a labyrinth of poorly lit corridors, filled with rusted metal filing cabinets and cardboard boxes covered in a thick layer of dust. The air was heavy, smelling of old paper and stagnant time. Elena, accompanying the team, guided them with her memory, pointing to the area where the elder Vance's office used to keep his oldest belongings. While Steiner's team began its methodical search, on a floor above, Sophia Vance was fighting her own internal battle. The image of her father, a broken and bitter man, and the memory of her grandfather, whom she only knew from stories and photographs, haunted her. She felt increasingly distant from the blind loyalty she once felt for her father. Driven by a visceral need to understand the roots of that moral decay, she also remembered the stories about the basement. She used to play there as a child while her grandfather worked late. She remembered a small, locked storage room he called his treasure chest. The narrative split, creating rising tension. In the main basement corridor, Steiner's team, equipped with flashlights and gloves, opened drawers and boxes, cataloging old financial documents, contracts, and personnel records. In a parallel, darker corridor, Sophia used her cell phone flashlight, following a map etched in her childhood memory. She wasn't looking for legal or financial leverage. She was searching for the soul of her family. Elena felt the tension in the air. She watched the search, her heart heavy. She was no longer a passive victim. She had become the key to a past that could redefine everyone's future. She felt responsible, not just for Steiner, but for the legacy of the good man who had given her her first job. Her presence there was a silent testimony to the poetic justice unfolding. Vance, in his office, he received updates by phone. With every hour that passed without his lawyers being able to stop the search, his desperation increased. He began liquidating some of his personal financial holdings, selling cryptocurrencies and gold at unfavorable prices, just to have more cash flow, more capital for a war he felt was already lost. Back in the basement, Sophia's search led her to a small wooden door at the end of a dead-end corridor. It was locked, but the latch was old and fragile. With a firm push, the door groaned and gave way. Inside the small room, there was a single metal shelf, and on it, a small metal box, secured with a rusted padlock. At the same instant, from the other side of the shelf, in the main corridor, Klaus illuminated a gap between two stacks of boxes with his flashlight. He saw the same metal box. He circled the shelf and entered the small room, coming face to face with Sophia. Their light beams crossed. They stared at each other in silence for a long second, not as enemies, but as two explorers who had reached the same unknown treasure. exactly at the same time. The silence in the small basement room was broken only by the distant hum of fluorescent lights. Sophia and Klaus looked at each other, mutual surprise giving way to silent caution. He represented the man who was dismantling her father's empire. She was the heir of the empire he was helping to conquer. Yet, in that moment, amid the dust and shadows, they were just two people searching for the same truth. Klaus was the first to speak, his voice calm. "Miss Vance, I didn't expect to find you here." "I think we're looking for the same thing," Sophia replied, her chin raised, but without hostility. She looked at the metal box. "I believe the key to everything is inside." Instead of starting a dispute, they reached a tacit agreement. They would take the box, together, directly to Mr. Steiner. It was the only way to ensure the contents were treated fairly. The journey from the basement to Steiner's hotel suite was tense. When they arrived, Steiner received them, his gaze moving from Klaus to Sophia with sharp curiosity. He invited Sophia inside, offering her a seat. Elena Santos was also there, her presence bringing a dignified calm to the environment. With a small tool, Klaus opened the rusted padlock. Inside the box, atop a pile of yellowed papers, was a black-covered journal. Steiner picked it up with an almost solemn reverence. Opening it, they found the elegant handwriting of the elder Mr. Vance. It wasn't an accounting ledger, but a journal of principles, pages upon pages on business ethics, on the importance of treating every employee like family, on how a company's true profit was measured by the well-being it generated in the community. These were the thoughts of a man who saw his business not as a money-making machine, but as a living organism with responsibilities and a heart. There was an entire page dedicated to the longest-serving employees, and there was the name Elena, the embodiment of integrity and hard work. "We must always ensure she and her family are cared for." The words were a devastating testament to how far the company had strayed from its original course. As Steiner read excerpts aloud, a new dynamic formed in the room. Sophia no longer saw Steiner as a predator, but as the unexpected guardian of her grandfather's legacy. Steiner, in turn, saw in Sophia not the daughter of his enemy, but a potential ally in the restoration of that legacy. The conversation deepened. Steiner spoke about how Elena's generosity shaped his worldview, teaching him that the greatest wealth is not in accumulating assets, but in building human connections. He confessed that, although he had become a billionaire, with a net worth spanning dollars, euros, and investment funds worldwide, he often felt empty, searching for a greater purpose for his fortune. That journal, in a way, gave him that purpose. Elena, in turn, felt her own value transform. The words written about her so many years ago by the elder Mr. Vance were a validation that healed decades of feeling invisible. She began to understand that her simple life had made a profound and lasting impact. At the bottom of the box, beneath the journal, Sophia found a sealed envelope. On the front, her grandfather's handwriting read, "To my son, when you feel lost." Sophia's heart pounded. It was a message from the past, a time capsule of love and concern. She knew with an overwhelming certainty that she had to deliver that letter. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the ultimate key to her father's hardened heart. Sophia held the envelope as if it might crumble in her hands. The paper was old, but the weight of the intention behind it seemed immense. She knew the confrontation with her father could not be postponed. She returned to the Sterling Group building, now a ghostly place where fear and uncertainty hung in every corridor. She found Vance in his office, not working, but simply sitting in the dark, staring into space. The room, once a symbol of power, was now a chamber of defeat. He looked smaller, shrunken in his expensive chair. "Dad," she said softly, so as not to startle him. He turned slowly, his eyes lifeless. "What do you want, Sophia? Did you come to see the end of everything?" "No," she replied. Approaching him, I came to bring a message." She extended the envelope. Vance looked at the handwriting and a tremor ran through his body. He recognized his father's script instantly. He didn't take the letter. "Read it," he said, his voice hoarse. "My eyes are tired." Sophia sat in the chair across from him, and Taesh, under the weak light of a desk lamp, opened the envelope. Her voice was steady as she read the words her grandfather had written so many years ago. The letter was not a rebuke, but a plea. The elder Vance spoke of his pride in his son, in his ambition and business intelligence, but he also expressed a deep fear. "My son," the letter read, "I see the hunger in your eyes, the hunger for more, for bigger, for faster. It is the same hunger that drove me. But remember that hunger, if unchecked, devours the soul. You are building an empire of numbers, of stocks, of assets. But what is your true net worth? One day, all the money, all the dollars and dividends will not be able to fill an empty heart. Do not forget the people. They are the only treasure that truly matters." As Sophia read, a powerful flashback took hold of Vance's mind. He saw himself as a boy, walking through the company's first headquarters with his father. His father stopped to chat with every employee, asking about their families, laughing with them. Young Vance grew impatient, thinking it was a waste of time, a distraction from the real goal, profit. "Daddy, we're wasting time," he would say, and his father would kneel down, look him in the eyes, and say, "Son, this is time well spent. This is the real business." The letter and the memory collided, breaking the hard shell Vance had built around himself for 30 years. The loss of the company, the public humiliation, none of that had broken him. But the gentle, worried words of his father, read by his daughter's voice, disarmed him completely. A sob escaped his throat, a guttural sound of pain and regret. Tears, which he hadn't shed since childhood, finally came, washing away the bitterness and anger, leaving behind only deep shame and sorrow. He hadn't just lost a company, he had lost himself. He had betrayed the legacy of the man he most admired. Meanwhile, in his suite, Steiner presented his vision to Eleanor. "The journal gave me an idea," he said. "I don't want you to be just the building superintendent. That is too little. I am going to establish a foundation, financed with a portion of the new company's profits, a foundation dedicated to employee and community well-being. And I want you to be the chairwoman." Elena was speechless. From cleaning woman to chairwoman of a foundation, the idea was dizzying. "But, Mr. Steiner, I have no education. I don't understand business." "You understand people, Elena," he replied with conviction. "You understand dignity and compassion. That is more important than any diploma. You won't be alone. You'll have a team to handle the details. Your role will be to be the heart of the foundation, to be the guardian of the soul this company lost." That night, Vance, after his emotional catharsis, did something his pride would never have allowed before. He picked up the phone and dialed the number his lawyer had given him. When Steiner's assistant answered, his voice was humble. "Please tell Mr. Steiner that I need to speak with him and Elena Santos, in person. I will go to them." The surrender was complete. The location chosen for the meeting was not a cold, impersonal conference room, but the same neighborhood coffee shop where Steiner and Elena had reconnected. The choice was Steiner's, a symbolic gesture to level the field, to remove the trappings of power and leave only the human beings. Vance arrived promptly, dressed simply, without the designer suit that was his armor. He looked older, his shoulders slumped not by the weight of age, but by shame. Sophia accompanied him, a silent support at his side. Steiner and Eleanor were already seated at a corner table, a teapot and cups between them. There were no aides, no lawyers. The atmosphere was intimate and laden with solemn expectation. Vance walked up to the table, stopping in front of them. His eyes didn't seek Steiner's, the billionaire who had defeated him. Instead, he fixed on Elena Santos, The woman he had hurt so profoundly. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but every word was clear and heavy with remorse. "Elena Santos," he began, and the address was spoken with a respect that had never been there before. "There are no words that can erase what I did. My cruelty was unforgivable. I was afraid, feeling my world collapse, and I took out my weakness on the most decent person in that room. I do not ask for your forgiveness, for I do not deserve it. I only ask that you accept my deepest, most sincere apology." Tears welled up in Vance's eyes, but this time they were not of self-pity, but of genuine regret. He bowed slightly, a gesture of submission and respect. Elena, watching him with a mixture of compassion and sadness, felt her own heart soften. She saw before her not the monster who humiliated her, but a broken man, confronted with the bankruptcy of his own character. After apologizing to Elena, Vance finally turned to Steiner. He offered a folder he was carrying. "Mr. Steiner, here are the documents. I resign my controlling interest in the Sterling Group. I hand them over to you. I don't want to negotiate a price. I don't want a deal. Consider this restitution, an attempt to repair the damage I caused not only to Elena Santos, but to my father's legacy." The gesture shocked Steiner. He had expected a negotiation, a final attempt to salvage something. But this was an unconditional surrender, an act of penance that went beyond any business strategy. He saw that the transformation in Vance was real. The man had lost everything, his fortune, his power, his possessions. But in that act of surrender, he was beginning to find something much more valuable, his lost dignity. He was finally understanding that his true net worth was not in his financial statements, but in his actions. Sophia watched, her heart filled with a proud ache. Her father, at the bottom of his well, was finally becoming the man her grandfather always wanted him to be. The silence that followed was filled with a complex tapestry of emotions. Justice had been done. Revenge had become unnecessary. What remained was a group of people united by a history of pain, kindness, and now a possibility of redemption. It was Elena who broke the silence. Her voice, always soft, carried a new strength. She reached her hand across the table and, with a gesture that surprised everyone, placed it gently on Vance's arm. He flinched at the touch, as if he were unworthy of it. She looked at him, her gentle eyes seeing past the fallen CEO, seeing the lost man that his father's letter had revealed. "Everyone," she said, with a profound simplicity that resonated in the souls of all present, "deserves a second chance to do the right thing." Elena's words, "Everyone deserves a second chance," transformed the atmosphere of the coffee shop. They were no longer the words of a victim offering forgiveness, but those of a matriarch declaring a new way forward. That act of grace, so unexpected and profound, changed the course of everything. Steiner looked at Elena with renewed admiration. She, who had suffered the greatest humiliation, was now the moral compass guiding them all. Her capacity for forgiveness was a force far greater than all his capital and business power. Inspired by her wisdom, Steiner felt his own resolve shift. The hostile acquisition, born of anger and a desire for justice, could become something more constructive. He pushed back the folder Vance had offered. "I accept your surrender, Dr. Vance," he said, "but the terms have changed." Vance and Sophia looked at him, confused. "I will still acquire control of the Sterling Group," Steiner continued, "and I will restructure it top to bottom based on your father's journal principles. We will create employee profit-sharing programs, improve benefits, and invest in the community. The company name will change. The focus will no longer be solely on profit, but on legacy." He then turned to Elena. "The Legacy Foundation, as we decided to call it, will be the beating heart of the new company. And you, Elena, as its chairwoman, will have the authority and funds to ensure that no employee ever feels invisible or undervalued again." Then, He fixed his gaze on Vance. The moment of truth had arrived. As for you, your offer to give everything up is noble, but it is not what I want. Disappearing would be the easy way out. Redemption is a much harder road. Steiner paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. I offer you a chance to stay, not as CEO, not as director. You will start from the bottom, in a senior consultant role. Your experience is valuable, but your authority will have to be earned back, not imposed. You will report to a new board, led by people who share your father's vision, including your daughter, Sophia, who has proven to have the character that was missing in your leadership. The proposal was a blow and a blessing at the same time. It was a punishment and an opportunity. Vance would not keep his wealth. He would not keep his status, but he would receive something much rarer, a path back. He would have to work every day in the building that was once his kingdom, under the eyes of the very people who feared him, and prove, through actions, not words, that he had changed. The decision was his. He could refuse, take what little remained of his personal assets, and disappear into an anonymous, bitter retirement, or he could accept the more difficult journey, the humiliating climb back to respectability. He looked at his daughter, Sophia, who watched him with eyes full of hope. He looked at Eleanor, whose grace had offered him this improbable possibility, and he looked at Steiner, the man he had hated, but who now revealed himself to be a severe yet fair judge. Vance took a deep breath, the first breath of truly free air in years. I accept, he said, his voice firm for the first time. It was not the voice of a CEO, but of a man ready to start over. In that small coffee shop, the most important agreement of their lives was sealed, not with signatures on a contract, but with the promise of redemption, the acknowledgement of the past, and a shared commitment to a better future. The climax was not a victory or a defeat, but a delicate and hopeful balance. The next 6 months were a period of seismic transformation at the now renamed Sterling Legacy Group. The change was felt at every level of the organization. The logo was redesigned, incorporating a stylized tree that symbolized the roots planted by the founder, but the deepest changes were not aesthetic. Under the new leadership, with Sophia as an influential director and a new executive team chosen by Steiner, the company culture began to heal. The first initiative, overseen by the Legacy Foundation, was a salary adjustment for all basic employees, with a special focus on the maintenance and cleaning teams. Elena's words in her first meeting as chairwoman of the foundation echoed throughout the building. A house is only strong if its foundations are cared for. She was not an executive in a suit, but a constant, accessible presence. She walked the halls, ate lunch in the cafeteria with employees, and listened to their concerns. With the foundation's funds, she created a scholarship program for employees, children, and an emergency fund to help struggling families. She became the soul of the company, the guardian of its new conscience. Vance, meanwhile, navigated his new reality with a humility no one ever thought possible. He occupied a small glass office in the middle of a busy floor, without the opulence and isolation of his old office. His job consisted of analyzing processes and offering advice on operations. Initially, employees treated him with a mixture of fear and disdain. He was the ghost of the old regime, but day after day, he arrived early, worked in silence, and treated everyone with contained respect. Slowly, the perception began to change. One day, a young intern was crying at her desk, overwhelmed by a complex spreadsheet. Vance, passing by, stopped. The old him would have ignored or reprimanded her. The new Vance pulled up a chair, sat beside her, and patiently spent the next hour teaching her how to navigate the system. It was a small moment, but it spread through the office as a signal that the change was real. Vance's relationship with Sophia also slowly healed. Their conversations were no longer about profit targets or failures, but about people and principles. He started asking about her life, listening to her opinions. For the first time, they were building a father-daughter relationship, not a boss-subordinate one. The central conflict of the story, the struggle for power and survival, had been resolved. Now, the characters' narrative arcs found their emotional conclusion. Elena found her voice and her power, not through money, but through her integrity. Steiner, the reclusive billionaire, found a purpose for his vast fortune, transforming his investment into a legacy of human impact. Sophia flourished as a leader who honored the past while building the future. And Vance, in losing his empire, was finally on the path to finding his soul. The resolution was not a magical return to what was before, but the construction of something new and better on the ruins of the old. A year after the day of that fateful meeting, the atrium of the Sterling Legacy Group was unrecognizable. The cold marble had been warmed with plants and comfortable seating areas. Where tense silence once reigned, there was now the sound of conversation and laughter. The company was celebrating its first anniversary under the new direction, and the event was for everyone, from the highest executive to the newest member of the cleaning team. Steiner took the makeshift stage. He did not use the tone of a distant billionaire, but of a community member. "A year ago, I came to this building to make a deal," he began. "I spoke the language of capital, of assets, of profitability, but I was reminded, in a very powerful way, that there are other languages, the language of kindness, of dignity, and of gratitude. We learned that a company's greatest wealth is not in its vaults or its stock market shares, but in the heart of its people." His gaze met Elena's in the front row, and he smiled. "The best investment I have ever made in my life did not yield interest in dollars or euros, but in hope. And that investment was a pair of shoes, given by a woman with a heart bigger than this building." Warm applause filled the atrium. Next, Elena was invited to speak. She ascended the stage with her usual simplicity, holding the microphone with both hands. "I'm not much for speeches," she began, her voice soft but clear. "I just know that for many years I worked in silence, trying to do my best. I never thought anyone would notice, but what I've learned this past year is that no act of kindness is too small. A gentle word, a plate of food, a little help. You never know how far that little ripple can go. Thank you for giving me the chance to continue to help." Her simple words, coming from a life of experience, touched the audience more than any eloquent corporate speech. In the crowd, Vance watched, standing beside Sophia. He was not on stage, not in the spotlight, and he was perfectly at peace with it. For the first time in decades, he felt that he belonged to something instead of just owning it. He smiled, a genuine and serene smile, and Sophia took his hand, a gesture of acceptance and restored love. Later, as the party wound down, the four met in the conference room atop the building, the same place where the story had begun. They looked out the panoramic window, the sun setting over Chicago, painting the sky with colors of orange and purple. There was no more tension there, just a silent camaraderie. "It's a beautiful view," Elena said, marveling. "Yes, it is," Vance agreed, his voice quiet. "But for years I looked at it and only saw buildings to buy, deals to make. Today, I see homes. I see people." The transformation was complete. The room was no longer a glass cage, but an observation deck, a place to see not only how far they had come, but the vast horizon of possibilities that opened up when business was guided by humanity. Their story, which began with an act of cruelty born of desperation, had concluded with a circle of healing, proving that true fortune is not what is accumulated, but what is distributed, and that the most enduring legacy is built not with bricks and steel, but with compassion and second chances.